my process of actually buying starts with the catalogue, and I will go through the catalogue, and because there are so many horses for sale at auction, thousands, there's only so many we have the time to actually see. So I would eliminate yearlings by stallions that are unsuccessful, that have been given opportunities that haven't actually reached their potential, and out of mares that perhaps have not lived up to expectations either. So I'll knock those off the catalogue before I start. And sometimes if I'm trying to buy a precocious 2-year-old, I would probably lock off all the late foals, because that's obviously relevant if they're competing the early part of their 2-year-old career. So I start off at home knocking off animals on the book. Then in principle I try to see mostly everything that comes up for auction, time permitting, and I can look up to about 100 a day depending on the organisations that are showing them to me. I might go to one farm with 20 and another farm with 10, but I can get through roughly 100 a day. So I'll do quite a few in Ireland for a solid week, and then I'll do the farms around England for a week, and then prior to the sale starting I will look at 100 a day before the sale starts. And at this point really what I'm doing is just eliminating animals rather than picking the ones I'm going to buy, and it's not until the day before the sale that my shortlist starts to take some form. I will at that point then see the horses again, and if I like them at that point I will then send them to the vets, have them vetted. We do scoping, looking at their larynx, their airways, and then I will have the horses x-rayed. A lot of the top vendors will supply x-rays, and we'll have those read to make sure there's no bone deformities. And then I'll have a clinical examination of their eyes and their heart, etc., etc. And then when all that's in process, it's a matter of me forming a list and understanding the catalogue as a whole, to understand that a horse selling on a Tuesday that might come available might end up costing more than a horse on a Friday. So it's trying to be seeing the catalogue in advance and seeing everything before the sale starts. What I'm initially looking for is that the horse that I'm looking at has some bearing on the pedigree that I'm reading. So I like to see some recognition of the animal I'm looking at. For example, if I'm trying to buy a horse in my mind to stay 1.5 miles as a 3-year-old, I don't want to be looking at a highly muscled, short-backed little horse that's not a great walker. To race over 1.5 miles, I'd be looking at a horse with some length, some stretch, and some scope, as we call it, that covers the ground, because they're obviously needing to go 1.5 miles. They need to be very efficient in their action. So formulating the type I'm looking at and the page becomes quite an important part of the process. You've seen the likes of Andre Agassi, who couldn't walk a yard. He was still a good athlete, but he was a very choppy little walker. And you might have seen a Sebastian Coe that was an effortless moving person. From our point of view, action plays such a phenomenally important part. As I explained, every stride that a horse takes puts a tremendous bearing on his heart and his lungs. Every stride will affect his breathing, and his breathing affects his heart. A fluent flowing horse at any trip is pretty vital to conserve energy when it all counts at the end of the race. So we like to see a horse that moves very well. It's not to say that we only buy horses that are extremely fluent, because again we've learnt back in the old days that one could also find those horses that walked so well that they were actually slow. They were very slow paced horses. So it's trying to find the balance of a horse that looks agile, looks an athlete, and moves well.
All those things are very...
Horses can walk badly for a number of reasons. They might not have been shod that well, and we only have a few minutes to make up our minds. We might have a handler that's not strong enough to actually correct the horse and make him do what he wants to do. So I would say analysing the walk does take a little bit of time to understand, but in principle, if all the boxes are ticked at the yearling cells, if a horse is a bad walker, with a good handler and a top-class stud farm, then there's a probability he'll always be a moderate walker.
And Sir Michael Stout are the trainers.
I think you could see the difference between a Kenyan runner and a bull sprinting character, physical human being. So relating that the same, although the margins are very tight, they don't have to strike you dramatically by being great big bullish horses to sprint and fine agile horses to stay. The margins are narrow, but that's our job to define the difference between the sprinter and the stayer, or middle distance horse, according to the way it's bred and the way it looks. That really needs to have such a good angle for me. There are certain pedigrees where you expect a temperament to be part and parcel of the makeup of the horse that you're about to buy. Mangeur is a classic example of a horse that is highly charged, but that is actually what you're almost looking for. They need that to make them operate as they do. I think a good sober old staying horse might not necessarily have the flair to have a turn of foot at the end of a race. So temperament plays a part, but only according to how the horse is bred. Not every sire stamps his stock, or I should say not every successful sire stamps his stock to look like himself. So over a period of time we learn year on year which stallions can do what with their offspring, and perhaps some mares become the dominant factor, and if she's a proven mare that hasn't necessarily thrown to the stallion but thrown to herself, we are trying to take that all into account. But yes, in principle it's comforting to know that you understand what you're looking at is what you're buying on the page. The fellow had his cap on. If I was a betting man, I think I could probably make money at the races understanding horses in the paddock, being a paddock judge, purely on make, shape, according to how the horse is bred, who trains it, and its then physical condition. I always think with the young 2-year-olds, part of that aspect of going racing is watching them canter to the start, because they might look good in the paddock, but if they go to the start looking a little bit green and looking around themselves, there's a strong probability that first time they're not going to be able to cope with understanding what they're doing on the first time on the race course.